Hello, and welcome back to Missouri Civil War. In July 1863, the fall of both Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Port Hudson, Louisiana, placed the entire Mississippi River under federal control. This cleaved the Confederacy in two, and it isolated Texas, Arkansas, Indian Territory, most of Louisiana, and all of Missouri from Confederates in the east. But pro-Confederate Missourians nonetheless believed that they could reclaim their native state. Many of them, of course, had been exiled back at the beginning of the war, or perhaps by Order Number 11. They thought still they could drive out Union troops who had held the state. And secessionist leaders, who have been gone from Missouri for years now, they were convinced that the greatest number of Missourians were still sympathetic to their cause and would be ready to rally behind them. In 1864, Missouri Confederates thus hatched a plan to reclaim the state. Their effort hinged upon the success of a bold incursion by Sterling Price. Today we examine Price's raid back into Missouri and his hopes of inspiring a broad uprising of Southern sympathizers. Things did not go according to plan. Union resistance forced Price to alter his strategy. In central Missouri, guerrilla violence continued to rage on, but Missouri rebels never saw their hoped-for uprising of support. At last, the Confederate coup de grace came along the Kansas border, as defeat at the Battle of Westport marked an end to the rebels' hopes for Missouri. Thomas C. Reynolds was the rebel governor in exile who had succeeded Claiborne Jackson. Reynolds had long pressed Confederate officials in Arkansas and elsewhere to sanction an invasion of Missouri. He noted the success of previous raids into the South, including Joe Shelby's cavalry raid of 1863, which had captured the city of Springfield, if only for a short time. I think that Union and Confederate forces shared an ambivalence about fighting for this rugged part of the state. Soldiers passing through the Ozarks praised the scenic beauty, but marching through these heavily forested hills was another matter. As one Illinois soldier wrote of his time in the Ozark Highlands, quote, "If the Southern Confederacy is like the part of Missouri we passed through, Jeff Davis is the most consummate ass for wanting it, and Uncle Sam ditto for not letting him have it," end quote. In August 1864, General Kirby Smith, the Confederate commander in the West, gave his approval for a raid into Missouri. Should it work, such an invasion would not only tie down a large number of Union forces who might otherwise reinforce William Sherman in the Deep South, but it also might yield supplies and recruits for the Southern cause. Smith ordered the Missourians to make the capture of St. Louis their foremost objective. Thomas Reynolds, who would accompany this raid, looked primarily at retaking Jefferson City for the restoration of his state government. Kirby Smith, like Ben McCulloch before him, had doubts about Price and his men, whom he often thought acted like plunderers more than soldiers. He wrote, "You will scrupulously avoid all wanton acts of destruction and devastation. Restrain your men and impress upon them that their aim should be to secure success in a just and holy cause, and not to gratify personal feeling and revenge." Sterling Price sent word via guerrilla captain George Todd that irregular fighters should intensify their raids north of the Missouri River. By attacking Union outposts and the supply lines, these guerrillas would help to soften up federal defenses ahead of Price's invasion. In St. Louis, the federal commander William Rosecrans learned that the Confederates were concentrating troops near the Arkansas-Missouri border. He chose to wait, rather than leave the city exposed or to reassign Union men from their scattered forces, instead of going to the South and confronting them. On September 19th, the rebels entered Missouri in 3 columns. They boasted a total force of some 12,000 men. Rosecrans then ordered General Thomas Ewing, late of Order Number 11 fame, to reinforce Pilot Knob, the southern terminus of the Iron Mountain Railroad. Ewing's force of 1,500 men held a hexagonal earthwork at a garrison called Fort Davidson. The post provided an open field of fire for several hundred yards in all directions, but it also sat below Pilot Knob Mountain and Shepherd Mountain, which left it vulnerable to artillery. Ewing recognized this location made the fort nearly indefensible. When Price met with his division commanders, and one of them, Joe Shelby, urged him to bypass Pilot Knob and to strike St. Louis directly, others within the group favored attacking the Federals at Pilot Knob to seize the fort's arms and to prevent a dangerous Union force from lingering within their rear. Ewing expected a Confederate attack, and he sent north by rail all of the quartermaster and commissary supplies that his men did not immediately need. The rebel attack eventually came, but Union troops held off Price's men, inflicting nearly 1,000 casualties. Late one night, the Federals executed a skillful evacuation in which they fashioned a long fuse that destroyed the fort's large magazine of gunpowder after they had slipped out quietly and moved to the north. Hours passed before Price realized the Union men were gone. Rebel cavalry under John Sabington Marmaduke pursued them, but Ewing's force managed to complete its retreat to Rolla largely intact. From Pilot Knob, Price's troops moved north, but they only skirted the Union defenses around St. Louis. The rebels then headed west along the Missouri River. Confederate forces destroyed miles of railroad. They captured the river towns of Washington and Herman. But when faced with the fortified Federal presence at Jefferson City, they turned upriver to Boonville. Meanwhile, as the popular uprising that Sterling Price hoped his Army of Liberation would inspire did not materialize, even in the wealthy slaveholding counties of the Missouri Valley, his request for increased guerrilla activity did find its intended audience. As Price's soldiers moved into the eastern Ozarks, a large number of guerrillas converged in central Missouri at Howard County. A September 24th rendezvous brought together as many as 200 guerrillas from several different bands. Most, including Todd and Bloody Bill Anderson, favored attacking the Federal garrison at the county seat of Fayette. William Quantrill deemed the Federal position too strong and chose to ride off. Outside Fayette, Bill Anderson's men donned Federal uniforms, but their plans for a surprise attack collapsed when a guerrilla noted an African American wearing a Federal uniform. Infuriated by the sight, the guerrilla shot him and alerted Union troops of their badly exposed position. The guerrillas were then driven out of Fayette, but 3 days later, Anderson's men struck the nearby town of Centralia for what became one of the war's most notorious incidents. As the morning stage from Columbia rolled into town, the guerrillas robbed its passengers at gunpoint. Among them was James Rollins, a Unionist congressman who managed to pass as a local farmer and Southern sympathizer. Some 2 hours later, as the noon train from St. Charles approached Centralia, Anderson's gang barricaded the tracks and ordered the passengers off the stopped train. These two were robbed. People who refused to move or to give up their valuables were shot. On board were 25 unarmed Union troops who were on furlough. Anderson separated these troops from the civilians, forced them into the depot, and lined them up. After ordering them to undress, the guerrillas shot all of the soldiers, one by one, with the exception of an Iowa sergeant named Thomas Goodman. Goodman was held as a hostage to be ransomed for guerrillas already in Federal custody. Anderson's men then raced out of town, but pursuing Union cavalry caught up with the guerrillas just outside of Centralia. The Union commander, inexplicably, ordered his men to dismount and to form a line against the bushwhackers. The Unionists were able to fire a single volley before they were quickly overwhelmed. Although the Union men tried to surrender, the guerrillas shot many of them. And as you've read in Nicole Etchison's piece in the New York Times, they then mutilated their bodies. By day's end, 146 Union soldiers and 3 civilians had been killed. Weeks later, guerrillas clashed with German-American settlers in Saline and Lafayette counties. Unlike the large German population within St. Louis, which had become a vital and growing part of that city, the immigrants who were clustered near Concordia and Emma were more isolated, both culturally and geographically. Their Unionist sympathies made them a repeated target throughout the war. The guerrilla attacks in October 1864 were especially bloody, as 25 farmers were killed, some with their skulls deliberately crushed. By war's end, as many as 20% of the adult men in these immigrant communities had been killed. At Boonville, the guerrillas, their saddles decorated with both ribbons and human scalps, joined with Price. The rebel commander directed Anderson to move north and destroy the North Missouri Railroad, which ran from Centralia to St. Charles. He sent Quantrill to destroy the Hannibal-St. Joseph Railroad. As Price's main force moved westward, mounted Union troops under Alfred Pleasanton pursued them, as did 9,000 infantry under A.J. Smith. Awaiting the rebels to the west were Federal troops in Samuel Curtis's Department of Kansas. Curtis set up two lines of defense. The first was on the bank of the Big Blue River, just west of Independence, and the second was just east and south of Kansas City, Missouri. He put James Blunt's U.S. volunteers on the Federal right wing, south of Westport. This was the first time during Price's expedition that he faced a significant force to his front. Kansas City was the headquarters of the Union's District of the Border, and just upriver from it sat Fort Leavenworth. As Price's Army of Missouri moved westward, they fought and won a series of skirmishes against Curtis's men, but none of them were decisive victories. The rebels were able to outflank the Federal troops to the south, crossing the Big Blue River on October 22nd. Union forces quickly reorganized, with Blunt constructing a new east-west line south of Westport, not far from the site of today's Country Club Plaza. On October 23rd, rebel troops attacked the Federals at Brush Creek. The battle was a stalemate until two things happened. First, Union men in the 9th Wisconsin Battery were able to get behind the Confederates to their southwest. And second, Pleasanton's mounted troops finally arrived from the east. The rebels were caught in a Union vice, surrounded on their west, their north, and now their east. A delaying action by Joe Shelby helped the rebels to withdraw, but the battle was a decisive victory for the Federals. This Battle of Westport was the largest battle of the Civil War west of the Mississippi River. It crushed Confederate hopes for retaking Missouri. Federal troops aggressively pursued Price's men along the eastern border of Kansas. They fought a series of running battles that further diminished Price's Army of Missouri. At Mine Creek alone, Price lost 600 men. By the time he was able to retreat into Indian Territory, his disintegrating army was half of its original size. Afterward, many of the pro-Confederate guerrillas followed the rebel troops southward. Price grumbled at the guerrillas' failure to accomplish the tasks he had set before them. The poor discipline that worried Kirby Smith had indeed haunted Price's army. After defeat at Westport, Thomas Reynolds returned to Marshall, Texas, and his Confederate capital in exile. The glorious return to Jefferson City never came to pass. The failure of Price's raid marked an end to fighting by conventional forces and the most notorious guerrillas in Missouri. It also happened at the same time that a bold faction of radical Republicans was coming to political power. In our next video, we consider the implications of that ascent. Until then.